Biyori is a warming show about girls growing up in the countryside of Japan, away from the big cities of the country. It's a lighthearted and casual slice of life that focuses on character reactions in order to complete its jokes. The show is very similar to shows like Yoru Camp and K-On! If you need a reference. The tone of the show is lighthearted and focused on making the audience laugh and filling them with a content feeling. The show does have its sad moments, and there are uplifting ones, and it generally stays away from things like drama, as it's a feel-good show the whole way through. Yet despite the tone the show chooses to carry, I still found myself at its mercy as one of the few anime to actually make me cry, or at least realistically tear up. What caused this wasn't so much of a plot, but the way the show presented itself. Yet, from everything that I told you, you should be thinking that it's a lighthearted comedy show, which is true. So, what in this show presented me with such a tearjerker moment?
Well, I could just tell you right now, I feel that you wouldn't understand what I'm getting at unless you understand the show first.
To completely understand the show, I think it's important to start with the characters. Biyori takes a lot of its comedy from character reaction, and allows them to bounce off of each other with natural sounding dialogue, making it vital to understand, and to understand how the show works, you need to understand how the characters work first. Even though there are multiple characters, the main focus of the show is on 4 of those characters, who are Renge, Hotaru, Natsumi, and Komari. Natsumi is a tomboy who's filled with energy but is undisciplined. Komari is Natsumi's sister and is more feminine than her. She gets easily flustered and angry due to the others teasing and viewing her as cute. The cute perception is due to her small stature, which she has a complex about. Renge is the youngest of the group and is seen as strange, even among the other characters. This is due to her confusion, which is caused by her age. She's not particularly sure how to interact, as she's not mentally developed enough to understand things like sarcasm and lying. This is a realistic trait seen among children in real life, and this is a perfect example of one of the key strengths of the show, its sense of realism in its storytelling. While slice of life is a very realistic genre, it doesn't follow this realism, especially when it comes to setting up scenarios. For example, ask yourself this: when was the last time that in real life, someone you knew walked into the wrong locker room and got thrown out for their troubles? A situation like this, more often than not, doesn't happen unless it's once in a blue moon. Biyori, however, focuses on more realistic situations, normally caused by Natsumi's laziness or Renge's love for adventure. While this does limit the possibility of storytelling, it does have its advantages. The stories told are often more relatable due to their realistic nature. The increased probability the viewer lived through a similar situation. Overall, it gives the show this sense of nostalgia for anybody who has been a kid before, which I'm assuming is most people watching this. But there's more to it. These events are also determined by their setting. Now, what setting is this? Biyori takes place in the rural areas of Japan, as I mentioned. The situations in the show are based on its environment. This is where the final character takes their place. You see, Hotaru is from Tokyo and not from the countryside of Japan. So, Hotaru, much like the audience, is probably going to feel pretty out of place in this setting, as they don't really understand the rural hobbies and culture. Hotaru's confusion leads to her asking a lot of questions, but instead of coming off as forced, it makes it feel more natural, since she is just as much of a stranger to this as anybody else watching is. This causes the show to be able to demonstrate some of the culture that exists within these rural areas, not only naturally, but in order to help those who wouldn't understand these cultures understand them, essentially becoming a showcase for these rural areas. But it's people who grew up in this culture that really can appreciate this. For those who don't know, I'm from the countryside in the United States. My hometown has a total population of 300 people, so yeah, we're growing. It's 15 minutes away from a small town and an hour away from an entire city. Watching this show, I was very pleased at how much it appealed to me and the life that I used to live, that by the time that this line came up, I was more than ready to tear up.
日陰ちゃんからメール来てる。なんて書いてるの？朝マック！すごい！
What made this line so powerful for me was how it perfectly represented how I grew up, in a situation I had to go through as a kid. Going to somewhere like McDonald's in the morning to get breakfast was a special occasion, since it was quite the distance away and needed to actually be properly planned. What made me so ecstatic about this line is to see such an accurate part of the culture that I grew up around represented. Of course, it wasn't just this line, though. Watching the show filled me with a sense of nostalgia for the environment, characters, and situations, since I could find all of them relatable. If you never grew up in the countryside, you wouldn't get the accuracy of this show, but that gives you the opportunity to learn about a culture that you're not a part of. As part of this culture, and as the show shows, you end up spending hours playing in a field with just a simple toy, or using a console, your main console, that's just terribly out of date due to the lack of technology that normally follows these areas. It even captures the feel of the freedom growing up in the countryside, the absolute variety in locations in the different areas that you get to play in. I'm not saying that these are traits that are exclusive to the countryside, but they're definitely a lot more common, and ones that I've experienced in my own childhood. It manages to capture the spirit of living in harmony with nature and animals, both as its master and someone benefiting from it. For someone who hasn't grown up like this, it's an amazing chance to take a peek at that life, and for those who have, it gives them a chance to not only feel nostalgic, but feel that there's something truly representing them. This show helped me realize something I never completely understood before: the feeling of being represented. Whenever representation was brought up in media, I was normally pretty clueless up until now. This is likely because when representation is brought up, there's always the emphasis on external attributes, which have never been a huge factor of my identity. This made it so that I was almost never going to realize the appeal to representation in media until I myself found something that I could relate to and felt that my experiences as a human being was represented in a form of media. From Japan, about girls. A cute show about girls. This made me realize the appeal to representation and its necessity in media. First, the characters can be a lot more relatable than they normally would be, because they've gone through experiences that you've gone through yourself. You find yourself liking them more, you find yourself rooting for them more, and you feel yourself looking up to them more. If you want to look at the opposite end, you can look at Mary Sue's and Gary Sue's, because they have this level of perfection that you can't relate to, unless of course you're a narcissist or a psychopath. Second, it helps remind you that you're not alone in this world, as sometimes it might seem. That there are people who've had similar experiences to you, and they're willing to put those experiences into what they write. And through their medium of what they created, there are going to be other people watching who also get to learn those characters and thus get to understand you more. This is where I believe most creators and viewers get the idea of representation incorrect. It's not about external attributes, which realistically makes up a very, very minute fraction of your identity. Something else that's great is the show's common humanity from the other side of the entire world. A manga created by a Japanese guy, produced by a Japanese company, about experiences by Japanese people, and we have a very similar experience over here in the United States. It really goes to show just how similar humans can be. It correctly captures the charms of the rural areas of the United States, our independence due to our isolation, our appreciation for what we have due to our lack of technology, and our willingness to adopt animals, since we're surrounded by and have a good understanding of nature. It didn't affect me because of a single sad moment, but actually just the overall tone that the show kept. The show uses this somber yet encouraging tone throughout the entire thing in order to keep this sense of nostalgia alive. The show completely understands the audience that it's aiming for, and for the audience that it's not aiming for, it understands that it can teach them something new about something that they previously didn't have a lot of knowledge about. It's this reason that I found myself liking Biyori a lot more than I initially thought I was going to when I started watching it, and one of the reasons that I'm very sad to see it go.